and it's a great honor to do some Sukkot preparation with my good friend Moshe Raps, who's a longtime listener to the podcast. For those listeners who don't know Moshe, Moshe has a day job as a wealth management manager, I guess. He's also very active in the community in Mitzvah Yericho and Yichud Hatzalah and other things. And on top of all of that, he spends time every week producing a wonderful podcast on the Parsha. Moshe, you may tell us what your podcast is about?
Sure. First of all, Yaakov, thank you so much for having me. It's great to speak to you and to do some Sukkot prep with you. The podcast is just simply called Rav Hirsch on the Parsha. Starting with Parshas Bereishis, I began to learn through Rav Hirsch's Perush on the Chumash, and I thought it would be informative and interesting to others who maybe have not learned through Rav Hirsch's Torah before, to sort of come with me on this journey. This is my first time learning Rav Hirsch Keseder. I've learned pieces here and there from Rav Hirsch, but my first time actually going through the entire Chumash with Rav Hirsch. And so I pick out, I have over the past year picked out usually one, sometimes more ideas on each parsha, and I discuss them within the worldview of Rav Hirsch.
Amazing, and I'm a big fan. I enjoy listening it when I get a chance on Erev Shabbos, and I highly recommend listeners to check it out. We'll put a link in the show notes as well. And the reason why I wanted to have Moshe on for this discussion is because there's a really cool piece that I saw a number of years ago in Rav Hirsch on Parshas Emor, when he talks about the Moadim, when he talks about Chag HaSukkos, specifically when he talks about the mitzvah of Etrog, the Netilas HaEtrog, where the pasuk tells us that there's a pre-Eitz Hadar, and he has a piece where he essentially summarizes some of the main points from the Masechah Sukkah on Daf Lamed Hey Amud Aleph, which gives a number of drashos about what the word Hadar signifies, al hadrash, right? The pshat is that it's something very pretty and beautiful, and Rav Hirsch acknowledges that in the beginning of the piece. But then he summarizes some of the drashos from Sukkah. Moshe, why is that important for Rav Hirsch to bring to the reader these drashos?
Well, part of what Rav Hirsch tries to do throughout his commentary on the Chumash, and those who have learned through Rav Hirsch's writings will certainly be familiar with this. Rav Hirsch was very, very focused on merging the two worlds of Torah Shebichsav and Torah Sheba'al Peh together. He lived at a time where Reform Judaism was gaining strength, was strengthening, perhaps was the dominant force that had to be combated in the world of traditional Orthodoxy. And Rav Hirsch was very focused on ensuring that the reader understands that there are not contradictory approaches to understanding the Torah. It's not the Torah Shebichsav on one hand, and then the rabbis made up some interpretations, made up some companion document to go along with the Torah and change things. But Rav Hirsch is very, very focused on showing how Chazal learned what they learned from the text of the Torah. And he very often will read the Perushim of Chazal back into the Psukim in order to stress that these are not two distinct sources, but one source of Torah Shebichsav, Torah Sheba'al Peh, which is from Har Sinai. So that's why Rav Hirsch very often throughout his Perush will reference Chazal and will try to merge these two worlds, two worlds of Torah Shebichsav and Torah Sheba'al Peh, to show that they're really one.
Amazing. So let's learn through these three drashos, and at the end we'll hopefully take some very interesting Musar and practical applications from these three ideas. Shetam Eitzo Upirio Shave Have Omer Ze Etrog. So the Gemara darshins that the taste of the tree and the wood of the tree is similar or even equal to the taste of the fruit. How is this bridged in Rav Hirsch's explanation? How is the pasuk hinting and leading us to this explanation that doesn't seem to have to do l'chora with the idea of a pretty fruit, which is hadar, but there's actually a hint in the pasuk that it's not just about the fruit, but it's about the wood and the tree and the branches as well.
Yeah. So here, if we can just read a little bit from Rav Hirsch's words, I think that it'll give us some of the enrichment that Rav Hirsch brings to this pasuk. And here I'm using the English translation, the newer English translation of Rav Hirsch, which is, of course, the Perush was written in German. But the Rav Hirsch says that when Chazal say in the Gemara that the tam etzo pirio shaveh, is that Rav Hirsch says that the ethereal material which gives the fruit its aroma exists already in the wood and the leaves of the tree, and it can be tasted. So, in other words, the just to bring out what he's saying is that the material which gives the fruit which ultimately we would eat, which gives it its flavor, which gives it its taste and its aroma, is already included, imbued in the actual tree itself. Now, the Rav Hirsch says this feature is indicated by the designation Eitz Hadar, pre-Eitz Hadar. For it is not the way of the Torah to refer to a fruit as the fruit of a certain tree, rather by a proper name, i.e. to call an apple or a nut the fruit of an apple tree or the fruit of a nut tree. Certainly, such phraseology is uncommon in the halachic sections of Scripture. And yet the Torah here uses such a phrase. And from this, we learn that the characteristic feature of the fruit exists already in the tree. The fruit represents the tree. From the tree, one discerns the nature of the fruit. And from the fruit, one discerns the nature of the tree. In short, tam etzo upirio shaveh. So what Rav Hirsch is saying here, I think, is that usually when the Torah refers to a fruit, it will talk about the fruit of a tree, the fruit of the apple tree. But here, when the Torah says pre-Eitz Hadar, is basically merging those two things. It's merging the tree and the fruit itself to show you that they're really one in the same, and that the fruit itself is getting the taste from the tree. And this continues Rav Hirsch and says, Eitz Hadar is a fitting name for this tree, for as the name implies, this tree has an abundance of fine ethereal material, which as a result of this abundance, not only develops in the fruit, but also flavors the wood and the leaves. So I think it's this idea of the merging, the melding of the fruit and the tree. It's almost like unclear what the proper noun here is. It's a pre-Eitz Hadar. Is it we're talking about the tree? We're talking about the fruit. And the answer is that we're talking about both. I think that's what Rav Hirsch is saying, where Chazal get this from, is that we're referring to a tree which has some sort of material, which has some sort of ethereal form within it, which, because of the abundance of that, transmits that taste to the fruit itself. But the fruit and the tree are really almost one and the same.
Right. So someone reading the pasuk not carefully would say it's talking about a pretty fruit, but you have to look carefully to see that the pasuk worded it in a way where it's a fruit from a pretty tree. That's the alternative, or the way that the Torah phrases it, to give that indication. And that way we see, as you mentioned in the open, that the drasha is not just being made up and stuck on a pasuk, but it's really coming from the depth of the text when you read it really carefully.
Exactly. It's a great example of Rav Hirsch reading back into the words the drasha of Chazal. You might look at the drasha of Chazal and say, what do you mean? The tam etzu pirio shaveh, what does that mean that the fruit and the wood taste the same? Where does Chazal see that from? The answer is because of the way that it's written in the text. Pre-Eitz Hadar refers to this fruit / tree that have this identical taste. The tree which produces this taste has this abundance of taste and then transmits that taste over to the fruit.
Interesting. Now, let's move on to the second drasha. And the Gemara has a little bit of a long discussion of how exactly to work this out. But I think even from the beginning through the end of the sugya, the understanding is that hadar is hinting to the word dir or dira, to live. And that indicates that on the tree lives fruit of all different types. And in the maskana, the way the Gemara says it is, by the time the newer, younger fruit grow on the tree, the big ones, the older ones, are still on, which indicates that the tree is never bare, and it doesn't have a single cycle where all the trees are, where all the fruit are growing together. But rather, the nature of the tree is that the fruits are all at different stages, which means that we can have at the same time living on the tree. We'll have big fruits and small fruits, and there will always be action on the tree from the fruit.
Right. And so this is another sort of classic Rav Hirsch methodological point where he connects similar sounding words in the Torah to one another that the average reader would not necessarily think were connected. Here, it's actually a bit more, or maybe I should say, a bit less of a jump than he sometimes makes. Rav Hirsch is very into phonetic connections between words, but here, actually, the shoresh may or may not be the same shoresh, but at least there are some of the same letters here. Rav Hirsch notes that the Eitz Hadar, the word hadar, is like a deer. Deer means a pen, like a corral of sheep. And Rav Hirsch points out that just like a pen of sheep or of cattle would contain both young and old animals, so too the Etrog tree contains fruits that, as you mentioned, are both young and old, from previous years and from the current year. And thus, if you would look at the Etrog tree, you would see, so to speak, a corral of fruits if you would look at a farm, an animal farm, you would see a pen filled with livestock, filled with cattle that are both older and younger. So too, when you look at the Etrog tree, you see a tree that has fruits that are both older and younger. So here, again, Rav Hirsch uses this word hadar to explain not just that it's a drush of that the fruit lives on the tree, but takes it a step further to show how actually you can read this into the very word hadar. If hadar is connected to the word deer, which again gives off this image of young and old together, that's where Chazal understood this idea of the Etrog tree being a tree that has both young and old fruits on it at the same time, the fruits that live from year to year.
Yeah, you have to really get into the Gemara to understand it completely, but the Gemara does actually make that connection explicitly in the beginning of the sugya, and then it sort of has a little bit of an issue, and then it comes to a new sort of way of saying it. But it's interesting that here it's an example where Rav Hirsch is really able to point to the Gemara and say, look, the Gemara is using this methodology. He will oftentimes do it on his own in a much more radical and expansive way. Here he's basically taking what the Gemara says in the beginning and sort of adding it till the end a little bit, but it is a great example of Rav Hirsch's shita, even though here it's not really his own invention. He really took it from the Gemara, but we have the connection between the word hadar and the word hadir, and showing that those two are connected. And that's how we have the second attribute of the Etrog tree, which is that there are always fruit living on it. Hadar bilano mishana l'shana is another phrase that the Gemara uses and Rav Hirsch quotes as well, to show that the Etrog is a tree that always has fruit on it. And let's move on now to the third and final drasha, where the word hadar is connected to a word which is actually from Greek of hydro, which means water. So we know there's a fire hydrant, which is a source of water to put out fires. We know there's hydrotherapy when people go to the pool to rehab from different injuries. And here, the Gemara says that an estrog is very versatile in the different water sources that it can grow from. And therefore, the fact that the estrog can be sustained and grow from different types of water is connected to the word hadar, hydro, which means water.
That's right. And Rav Hirsch points out here that through artificial irrigation, the estrog is kept fresh and flourishing at all times. And thus, the hadar, the beauty that the Torah is referring to of the estrog, is that it's not subject to seasonal changes and dry spells, meaning that the beauty of the estrog has less to do with the physical qualities of how it looks, but rather that it is viable in all conditions. And that's something that is characteristic of this special fruit.
Okay, before we go to some of the more practical applications and some of the muster that we could take from this, we're going to open up a parentheses for a moment and learn the next piece of Rav Hirsch. I think I would call it like a slam dunk, because a slam dunk is not really necessary. You could score the basket without it, but it's just really cool and you can do it. So Rav Hirsch brings in this really cool piece from a few professors of German natural sciences in Dresden to add on to this idea. Moshe, you want to share that with us?
So Rav Hirsch says that one of his friends called his attention to the comments of a Professor Reichenbach, who's a professor of natural sciences in Dresden, who wrote in the 1830s about the estrog tree. And he claimed, disputing some claims of other prominent scientists at the time, that the citron and orange trees, I guess what we would call the citrus trees, are the crown jewel of the entire vegetable kingdom. And he quotes 16 reasons for why this is the case, but Rav Hirsch brings a few of them. I think it's just very interesting to read a few of these. Rav Hirsch brings. Number one, again, reasons why the citrus fruits are the crown jewel of the plant kingdom. That no other plant contains such an abundance of the delightful ethereal oil. This oil is held in cells formed especially for this purpose, and is found in all parts of the tree, in the seed lobes and the earliest shoots, in all branches, stems, leaves, bosses, petals, stamens, and in the fruit. So reason number one, that it has an abundance of this delightful ethereal oil, the aromas, the scents, and perhaps even some of the taste as well of this unique citrus fruit. Another reason, the stem lasts longer than all other kinds of wood. Another reason, the leaves are perennial and evergreen. Right? This should start to sound a bit familiar, because a few of these are already a few of the reasons that Rav Hirsch has discussed for what Chazal mean when they say Pri Eitz Hadar, that the wood, the leaves, the stems, the fruits are all imbued with this ethereal oil, this scent, this taste, which then is transmitted to the fruit itself, the stem, which lasts longer than all other types of wood, that the leaves are always green. Another reason, it can almost be said that these trees blossom all year round. Again, this is where first mentioned that the tree, the connection to hydro, that the Etrog tree can survive in under any conditions as long as it has any source of water. Another reason, fruits of various years can be seen on them year in and year out. That's Hadar, Be'ilano, Mishana Lashana. They can be grown with ease almost anywhere. So again, Rav Hirsch summarizes, these are the remarks of a modern botanist, and they agree almost word for word with what is said in the Gemara and Sukkah, which is, as you mentioned, Yaakov, I think a slam dunk. Not necessarily that the Gemara needs to be validated by external scientific sources, but when it is, it just makes it all that much more powerful.
Right, I really was. My mind was blown when I came across these connections, and it was really, really cool to see. So now let's transition to the last part, which is I saw this and it really made me think so deeply about a lot of areas of our life as Bnei Torah, working Bnei Torah, and I think the one word that we could really summarize the connections would all be the word consistency. We have the consistency between the inside and the out, what the Gemara elsewhere calls toho kivoro, the fact that there is sweetness not just in the external manifestations, but also in the scenes behind the wood that helps grow the trees. So we have that form of consistency. We have the consistency of time. There are different times of year, and whereas other trees might have times of year where they'll just be taking an off season, but the Etrog tree is always on in some form or another. And finally, we have the consistency of location, that our lives take us to all these different places, whether we're traveling for business or moving to different towns or finding ourselves just in different parts of town throughout the day, being a Ben Torah in all of those locations and being consistent. Not just I'm just a Ben Torah when I'm in my shtibel, but when I'm out in the town, I'm not so stark. So I think all of these forms of consistency all come out from these drashos and Chazal, and can remind us of some of the things that we should maybe be thinking about as we transition from Yom Kippur to Sukkot to Achrei Chagim, as far as making sure that we're not just feeling close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu when we're at the Elah of Yom Kippur and screaming Baruch Shem Kol Malchus Olam Va'ed, but also doing other things as well in other locations, in other settings, making sure that we're doing our best to have our Ben Torah hats on there as well. What do you take from these points to your from your experiences?
Yeah, that's a very, very apt and appropriate message to take. I think to just expand on that last point, that the Etrog can grow in multiple locations, in multiple situations, from multiple water sources. As you mentioned, consistency. We find ourselves a lot of times in various circumstances, situations where we didn't think that we would be, or we didn't know we could succeed in, or we didn't expect to be able to succeed in. We thought that perhaps success in learning, success in Ruchnius has to be when I am connected to I have to be connected to the main line, the main source of Torah. I have to be in yeshiva. I have to be connected to that main, the water main, so to speak. But the Etrog says, you know what? You can also produce fruit, even if you are connected to an alternative source of water. And from here, when I say alternative source of water, I don't mean something other than Torah, but I mean a Torah in a different form, or perhaps in a different method of delivery. I found for myself in the working world that you need to find alternative places where you can get that inspiration, whether it's learning in a shul, learning in your house, on the train, on a bus, listening to a shir while driving, listening to Shark Tank for inspiration. But I don't think I'm saying anything that any of your listeners don't already know, but I think we could take chizuk from the fact that the Torah already builds into the very concept of Etrog, this idea that it can grow anywhere as long as it has any kind of water source. As long as we have any kind of connection to Torah, we can grow, we can produce fruit. And I think that's point number one. I think also, just in terms of the first point, tam etzo upirio shave, I think to your point, we are now approaching Sukkot. We have gone through the Yom Noraim. We have gone through this building process of building ourselves internally, starting from Rosh Chodesh Elul, throughout Rosh Hashanah, the Aseret Simei Tshuva, Yom Kippurim, through Ne'ilah. I sort of look at that as that is building the tree. That's planting the tree. That's watering the tree. That's planting the roots firmly into the ground. And now Sukkot is where those roots, those leaves, those branches begin to bear fruit. It's where we can go and actually express our simcha about being together with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the extent to which the simcha comes out is really a reflection, a manifestation of the work that we've put in over the period of Yomim Noraim and the Aseret Simei Tshuva and Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippurim especially. And so it's not a contradiction to be besimcha, to sit in the sukkah, to eat and drink, to rejoice with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. That's not a contradiction to the Yomim Noraim. It's actually Eitzo Pirio Shaveh. It's the same type of tam. It's just it's a manifestation. It's the delicious fruits that were produced through the hard work of watering and maintaining this tree that we've been doing over the course of the past 40 plus days.
As you were talking about the different water sources, it sparked a thought in me that I didn't think of before, and I'd like to share it with you. I'm recording this from the Yeshuv of Bnei Torah, which is way down in the Negev, and we're surrounded by these beautiful fields. We're just at the end of the summer now, and even if you were to come here during August, there's all of this wonderful farming, and a lot of it comes from these really amazing technologies that many Israeli and other startups have developed to do tremendous amount of agriculture on a very little amount of water. And I think that one of the things that we can take from there is the fact that we should never underestimate the small drip irrigation that we might have access to in different areas and different places, because that could really turn into amazing, amazing things. And if you had doubts about it, maybe 20, 30 years ago, come down and see how much planting you can do on just a few drops of water on a very minuscule amount relatively. So that's, I guess, one thought that I had. The other thing that I was thinking about is I had an interesting conversation with one of the founders of the Yeshuv here, and he was talking about the process, which is still ongoing, that there is somewhat of a possibility that there exists some underwater something that if you drill down in the right spot and in the right way, that there is underground water sources that they could access. Currently, the water is being piped in from the more lush areas of the country, and it costs a lot of money, obviously, for the country, and then the cost gets passed on to the farmers, but there are still possible sources of water that are still being drilled for. And the takeaway from that is that even though you could make it work with drip irrigation, if you have access to a water main or something which is relatively more sufficient, more flowing and plentiful, so you shouldn't give up that search. If you have a possibility to attach yourself to a really strong flow of gushing water, you should still look for that. So the two things should be kept in mind at the same time. Number one is to realize the potential from the drip irrigation, but without giving up on the search and the attempts to find a more substantial form of water, a form of spiritual inspiration.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And if I may, because you mentioned where you're recording from, I'll also mention something actually that connects to experiences that I had today. I'm recording this from Mitzvah Yericho, and if you go up to the top of the Yeshuv, you can look out into the distance, and you can see the city of Yericho. And Yericho, the ancient city of Yericho, is called the Ir Tamarim. Why is Yericho referred to as the Ir Tamarim? So this is something actually that today, when I went to pick out my Arba Minim, the person we bought from mentioned, he said, "Oh, you're from Mitzvah Yericho. You should, these lulavim that I have are all from around that area." It's still to this day an area that produces a lot of tamarim that are used for lulavim. And later on in the day, I was talking to a friend who lives on the Yeshuv, who is a tour guide, and he mentioned that the reason that Yericho is called the Ir Tamarim, and perhaps this is something that is more well known, but it certainly was a chiddush to me, is that there are not very many trees that can grow in this type of climate. The date palms have very, very long roots, very deep roots, and they are able to access water sources that are inaccessible to other trees. And so I know that we're moving a bit away from the Etrog, but the lulav is part of the bundle as well. I think the lulav expresses this idea as well of that deep, deep search for water, even under the many, many layers of rock and sand and dry earth, that there's water under there. There's water down in those sources that you can find. And if you dig for it, not only will you find it, but it'll nurture you. And we know that the lulav is the tallest of all the trees of the Arba Minim. that we take, which is why the Gemara says we make the bracha on the lulav. But the lulav itself also has this concept of searching deep, deep down for water, bringing up water from those hard to reach places and using that to achieve great heights.
So to wrap up, I want to go back to your opening, and you spoke about how Rav Hirsch is trying to bring these drashos and show how they're alluded to and connected to the pshat. And so when we talk about the word hadar, the word is beautiful, and you think of an etrog, you think of a beautiful, gorgeous fruit. And these drashas, they're all about the consistency. They're all about a bigger picture, a broader picture of what the fruit is all about. So I think if we're reading the drashas back into the pasuk, what comes out is that the beauty of the etrog is not just about the here and now, like how pretty does this look right now. It's also about a lot more of the context, a lot more of a bigger picture. And, taking that to our lives, what comes out is that obviously we want to be successful in our spiritual endeavors and our Torah learning, but it's not just about the smaller picture of like, was today's Seder good or not? We should hopefully have a good Seder today, but we should also take a few steps back and say, well, wow, this is a Seder that I've kept on going throughout thick and thin. This is a Seder that I've been able to keep up, even though I'm in different locations and traveling on business. All these things give a much deeper sense of beauty to our religious experience versus just, was it geschmack or not? It's a lot deeper than that, and we can connect this to a vort that I think many say on the pasuk in Mishlei. We say sheker achein vehevel hayofi isha yiras Hashem hisis halal, and I believe the accepted pirush is that the yofi is not completely hevel; it's hevel when it's empty. If it's just the outside beauty without the yiras Hashem, that is sheker and that is hevel. But if you have yofi, which is accompanied by yiras Hashem, you have that holistic, deeper picture of the beauty. So that's something that we do appreciate and that we do strive for. So those two things tie together insofar as the beauty that we're striving for is both externally beauty. It comes off as being impressive and wow, but also has the deeper, broader implications.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that's certainly very much echoed within the first explanation of the Gemara, that the fruit is really just an expression of what's going on inside the tree. The fruit is not per se a delicious fruit, whereas the tree is ugly and decrepit. But no, the tree itself is tasty. The tree itself has reach, and the fruit is just an expression of what's going on internally inside of the tree. But another thought just came to mind while you were speaking as well, in terms of the beauty. And this is something that I was thinking about a bit earlier, but not necessarily in this context. But when I think of the second explanation that Rav Hirsch quotes from the Gemara of the esrogim that are on the tree, you have the smaller ones that have just started growing and the larger ones that have been on the tree for a little while. So this is sort of representative of I think many different things. Certainly it represents to me a family, generations. That part of the beauty of growth is not just your own personal growth, but it's also the growth of those around you, especially those in your immediate family, children, spouses, to sort of be on the tree for a few years, so to speak, and to see those new fruits growing and sprouting, and to share that space on the tree and grow together is something that creates beauty as well. And you see those different fruits all inhabiting that same space, then they're certainly not all at the same stage of growth, but that in and of itself is beauty. And I think you could take this in a number of different directions. But to me, that really spoke very strongly about this concept of sharing the growth experience with the family and ensuring that the tree which you've cultivated is also bearing fruits that are growing not just from year to year, but also that are starting anew, whether that be with your children or whether that be personally with new projects that you're taking on, that you're starting something new and fresh in at the same time that you are continuing to do things that you've been doing for many years already.
I like that a lot, and actually reminds me of one of the things that we're trying to do here on Shark Tank is the fact that, for me, entering the workforce, it seems like this very lonely and difficult path, but there are so many who have done it before me, these people who have a lot more experience and a lot more years on their resume and different successes and failures to tell of. So being able to create a space where, even though we're all very, very busy, but within the space of the podcast, people who are the younger on the tree the smaller fruits can connect to those bigger fruits and have a continuum, and being able to learn from each other is something that which you reminded me of as you were sharing that as well. So I think we're going to wrap it up here. It's late, and I appreciate you doing this on somewhat short notice, Moshe. Wishing you Chag Kasher V'Sameach, and to our listeners as well.
Thank you. You too. Chag Kasher V'Sameach. It should be a Chag of Simcha for you and for all of Am Yisrael.